take a second.
What are you using to like multi-stream? So I stream, I mean, I stream on Twitch because we talked there briefly. I'm dumping Streamlabs after day because there's audio issues. It just like suddenly shuts down, so I can't get audio from games or anything else. So I'm going to go with something else, XSplitty. But now I've got, like, I'm using OBS here right now just to set up an OBS virtual camera that Zoom will recognize.
Yeah.
And what else are you using besides Zoom that you might be able to?
I'm directly using Zoom, and as far as I'm aware, at the minute you can only stream to one thing with Zoom, just like this. I think someone, like T-Jump, I think he uses Restream.io or something. I think that's.
So Zoom is allowing you to restream directly to YouTube.
Zoom, but at the moment it's only one. So like you could live stream to Facebook, you could, or at least as far as my use of Zoom is kind of like, as far as I'm competent with Zoom, maybe you can stream to more, but I've not figured that out yet.
Cool.
Yeah, I think so. So pop out the chat. And so I guess one of the first things I wanted to kind of ask you and talk to you about is I've heard you obviously mention like in debates and things with people where like you were going to become a pastor at one point in your past, or you were thinking about a career in the ministry,
right?
And you were a Christian at one point, but I've never really heard you talk about if you can remember back when you were a Christian, like do you remember kind of a point at which you became a Christian, or where you thought, I believe this now, or was there like a process where you just kind of always someone who considered themselves as believing in God, or how did you become a Christian? Yeah,
kind of. So I just did a thing with Ray Comfort a couple of weeks ago, and of course he and his ilk are like, you were never a Christian, and I have to agree with him in the sense of, if by true Christian you mean somebody who actually has a relationship with Jesus, I don't think I ever did, and I don't think anybody else does either. I'm not saying they don't. I'm saying I'm not convinced they do. For me, my dad's family was Southern Baptist. My mom's family was primarily Catholic early on, but I barely remember that because my mom converted to be a Baptist shortly around the time they get married or shortly after, and then convinced her mom and dad and brothers and sisters and all that immediate family to stop being Catholics and be Baptist. So I was surrounded by this from the earliest age. I know I walked down the aisle at around the age of 5 at a revival at church. My mom will now tell the story that they weren't sure, so they went and talked to the pastor, can a 5-year-old really understand and accept Jesus? And the pastor's like, well, I'll have to wait and see. For me, when I hit my teenage years and I was we were active in church all the time. I was there Sunday morning, Sunday night, Monday night. I don't remember if there was a Tuesday night. There was definitely Wednesday night, Thursday night, other stuff going on all the time. Not that that has anything to do with how Christian you are or anything else. It's just that was my community. And I realized as a teenager that if I'm just now at the age of 13, 14, 15, starting to understand this stuff, how could I possibly have understood it at 5? And so, but that also set up a problem, because if I'm 14 and I'm just now beginning to understand what the preachers are talking about and study on my own and kind of begin to understand this, then that perhaps mean that I wasn't saved when I was 5. And yet from 5 to 14, I was convinced I was saved. And that was kind of eye-opening, because if you could be sincerely convinced that you're right with God and then have this epiphany that you don't even understand this stuff, then that means that all that time you spent thinking you were a Christian, you were possibly wrong. And how could we ever know? And we don't know. And so God only knows. And so it led to something in my teen years that I saw over and over again with a lot of my friends in church. And that was, you can't possibly live up to what Christianity of that stripe would actually expect of you. And so you're constantly either getting saved or rededicating your life, or it's like, I go out and I do. So like with Catholics, it's you go out and do something, then you go to confession. With Southern Baptists like myself, it's, you you did something, and now we're going to tell you how awful you are and how you need to get right with God and fix all that. So this constant rededication. It is, in fact, not in fact, I'm convinced it's a guilt cycle that maybe not intentional. It's not. I'm not saying that people don't believe this. They sincerely believe, but it is a sort of guilt cycle that keeps people in that. And so at 18, I left and joined the Navy. And while I was still a believer, I wasn't active. I wasn't going to church. I didn't really care all that much. And it was much later that I finally decided, hey, I don't believe that. But for all those years, I thought I was a Christian. I don't get to decide who's a true Christian, who's not still, and not even then. And so if I have pastor friends currently who think that I'm still saved and that they will see me in heaven because they buy into a once saved, always saved doctrine. They've heard my testimony. They think that I was really saved. I have other pastor friends who are like, you were never saved. You were a false convert. God gave you over to a reprobate mind. And there's no way to prove any of this. But what I can say is I sincerely believed, the people around me believed, and the people around me were sincerely convinced that I believed, to the point that I did a debate with Michael Licona a few years ago, and a deacon and some other church members from the church I attended in high school flew down to Austin to be at this debate on the resurrection and to ask questions during the Q&A. And one of them got up and was like, hey, I don't know if you remember me, but I was a deacon and we all thought you were going on to great things. What happened? And so, yeah, that's kind of the story. I can't, if somebody says Matt was never a true Christian, I'm like, okay, fine. And if somebody says Matt was a true Christian, I'm like, okay, fine. All I can tell you is that for the bulk of my life, I sincerely believed and was convinced I was saved.
Do you sort of remember at all what it was like being you at that point? Like how believing in Christianity changed the way you sort of thought about the world? Like, was this concept of like spiritual warfare a thing? Were you thinking day to day when you were talking to people that these are tests from God or something like that? Can you remember any of that sort of stuff?
Yeah, it's kind of difficult. I joke sometimes. As a matter of fact, I joke several times about being able to put on my Christian hat or put on my atheist hat. And a fan of the show actually sent me a couple ball caps, one with like an ichthus Jesus fish on it, and the other one with, the Darwin fish, so I could literally swap back and forth. There are things that I don't remember, and it's very difficult to kind of wrap my head around, because what did I believe with regard to creationism versus evolution? I'm not completely sure. I think that I've always kind of accepted the science, and I think there were very few sermons about it. I was not part of an anti-evolution church or group, even though I think most of the people there, we were all creationists. It's just that we didn't know enough about evolution, and we probably figured, I think probably from my parents, it was something like, dinosaurs are real and God knows what happened and we'll all sort it out. The spiritual warfare stuff was far more prevalent. And one of the things that confused me was Monday night was visitation. So Sunday, people would show up at church, and I was there for morning services and evening services. And any guests would fill out a visitor's card. And it would include their address and anything else. And then on Monday, we would collect all those, and different groups of people from the church would go out and visit the people who had visited the church. And so you'd go there and you'd meet with them. And on occasion, we would meet somebody who would say they weren't religious or they didn't have a belief. And in my head, that was not the same thing as atheists. Atheists were God-denying savages who wanted to destroy God's country and kill babies and all this other stuff, because that's what I got from my mom. I remember watching Phil Donahue one day. I was young and just sitting there at home, and there was a woman on there who was basically like trash talking Jesus. And my mom comes in from the kitchen and basically says, what are you watching? And I was like, I don't know. It was just on here. It was Madeline Murray O'Hare. And my mom is like, oh, that woman's an atheist, and their atheists are evil and God haters and blah, blah, blah. And so that was all I knew. And so all these times I would go meet people who were atheists and atheistic at visitation who said they didn't believe. Our entire goal was to preach to the lost. Anybody who doesn't know Jesus, that's what you're supposed to do, is share that. And the people who, don't believe in God, those are atheists. But it never occurred to me that they were the same thing. And so it's really difficult sometimes thinking back to what I thought about certain things, because I was always skeptical. I just didn't apply the skepticism to my own religion. I was always science-minded. I just didn't really spend any time concerned with how to reconcile God and science. It never entered my mind. It was, science is here and God is a real thing and God is true and good and knows what happened and created all of us. And man's just floundering around trying to figure it out. We do the best we can. And that was kind of where I was. It's difficult, really difficult to go back and say, what did I think about this when? And what makes it even harder is that, like, if I talk to my brother or my parents, I'm not sure that they have a clear memory of it. Granted, I'm 51, so we're talking from 5 to 30, essentially. And so a lot of that is going to be faulty memory or misremembered, but I don't know. I remember going to church camp. I remember going to church. I remember praying. I remember feeling what I thought was the Holy Spirit in church. Goosebumps and elation and euphoria. But I don't remember too much about what I actually thought. I think I kind of went the way of like non-overlapping magisteria, that whatever God is and religion, my religion is ultimately true, and I'll find out in heaven. But for now, I'm stuck on this planet, and my only job is to live a Christ-like life and lead people to the Lord while trying to survive in a universe that's trying to kill me.
Do you remember if there was much kind of internal conflict or emotional turmoil during that deconversion stage? Thinking perhaps you were just kind of okay with it, or you don't remember? Sorry, you're not. I don't.
No, I there wasn't any. So I hear from people who really struggle with the sort of deconversion thing, of this sort of, I feel like I'm being forced to give up my faith, just from the weight of argument and evidence, and I'm really panicked about what would happen. That did not occur for me at all. I lost my job, and I thought that God was punishing me. I thought that God had wanted me to be a preacher, as did my family, as did the people from my church, and that I ran from that calling and instead went and worked, I did 8 years in the military. And then when I got out, I worked for Dell and was, an engineer, software engineer, hardware engineer, and building a career. And I was just living my life, and God wasn't all that important in my life. And I thought that's why I lost my job. I thought God said, hey, I told you to go do this, so now I'm going to yank the rug out from underneath you.
Right.
So I spent, when Dell let me go, they gave me enough money where I didn't have to work for a year and a half. And I used that time in prayer and study and talking with my uncle, who'd been a medical missionary, and some pastor friends of mine, because my roommate at the time was an atheist, and we just didn't talk about it. We were friends. And I thought, well, if I'm actually going to get serious, I have to figure out how to have a conversation with my roommate who's an atheist, because what happens if I get to heaven and God says, why is this guy who you love like a brother, who you lived with, who you had every opportunity to share with, why is he burning in hell? That was your job, was to let the Holy Spirit work through you to talk to him. And you didn't. So I started doing that. And then I started researching on how to convince him. And eventually, in fairly short order, it was a year and a half of study, but there came a moment where I was like, wow, I'm not a Christian. I can't be a Christian. I can't believe Christianity. What other God might I believe in? And it wasn't stressful. It wasn't traumatic. It wasn't like a one-day epiphany. It was a lead up to like a breaking point. And it was, for me, liberating and exciting. It felt like a massive weight had come off of me. God wasn't sitting there spying on me and judging me all the time or expecting something of me. And it gave an explanation for how I could sit here, well, not here in this room because I've moved since then, but sit in my room. Yep. And be sincerely studying and trying to do what I think God wants, and praying and begging for any sort of, please give me a tip, a hint, anything. What should I be saying? What should I be doing? How do I reach this roommate of mine? What's the answer to this problem here? hey, I'm starting to find stuff about the nature of evidence, and you're giving me nothing, and just begging and pleading for a God to provide any sort of something, and I get nothing at all. And it's like when I talk with theists now, when they say, well, God put it on my heart to talk to you, or God wanted me to, I always want to ask them. I asked Ray the other day when we were there, I was like, when you say you hear from God, do you mean you're hearing? Is it an auditory thing? Is it an in your head thing, or is it a feeling? Because we use a colloquialism of I heard from God, but that could mean different things. Probably, I won't give too many details. There's someone who's been emailing me hundreds of emails each day. Hundreds, 100 plus per day for the last few days. And they think that God has put a mission for us to be together. They're in love with me, and they think that they can help save me and all this other stuff. I don't know if that person actually thinks that they hear from God out loud, but they're close enough to that it could be an issue. Ray, of course, during the debate, is something I'm going to address later. He said, well, no, if I was hearing from God, I would go see a psychiatrist. And I thought, why? If in fact God is real and God exists, and you've been reaching out to God, and suddenly God speaks to you in a voice that you can hear, why would you go see a psychiatrist? Isn't that consistent with something that God could do and might do and would be expected? Isn't that what Abraham would have supposedly heard when God's telling him to kill Isaac? Do you think that Abraham just was sitting around eating his meal one day and got kind of a wild impression that maybe this is it? And it strikes me as funny that Ray's response is, well, that's just crazy, when what he's advocating isn't any more rational in my view. And I know I went far afield of your question, so.
No, it's okay.
Yeah.
No, it's interesting to me how you dealt with it, because like for me, I always thought like I'm being deceived by Satan or something like that because of the spiritual war. When I was having doubts and things, I was genuine mental illness, like thinking this is deceit from Satan. We're called to be in the world but not of the world, and I'm getting sucked into the world. And I actually
it's one of my favorite Petra songs. And my favorite Petra album was Not of This World.
Well, I actually thought that my girlfriend was like possessed by a demon at one point, because she was like reasoning with me in a secular way and stuff like that. And it's really interesting that you didn't have that craziness.
Not with me. So okay. My mom thinks she has seen demons. She has seen the demon of alcoholism on the shoulder of her father, staring at her and making faces. My mom is at that level where she thinks that she sees these, and she may or may not hear auditory or whatever. I don't know, but she's definitely convinced she's seen demons. So I did have that kind of stuff around me. The thing that you were worried about, I dealt with as well, which is that, we're supposed to be in this world, but not of this world. And how do we know that we're not being deceived by Satan? How do we know? It's like the dinosaur bones that are buried there. There's the T-shirt where it's Satan running around planting, evidence. Here's the thing, and this is why it was so easy for me. I'm not a god, and I'm not a demigod or an angel. But if there is, in fact, a God and a devil, if the Christian model is true, the devil was created by God, has been in God's presence, has witnessed God, has seen what God can do. Now, how stupid would you have to be to rebel against a God in that situation?
Right.
But, because you're going to lose. And the only, the only two justifications for that are raw evil, which is what we have, or a sense of justice, where I'm going to stand up to you even though you can squish me like a bug. But how do I tell if there's a bit of information coming in? How do I tell if it's accurate, if it's from a god or a devil? And if two incredibly powerful beings are fighting over me, and they both have the ability to provide delusions, and they both have the ability to deceive me, it cannot be reasonable for the good one to judge me for failing to see through delusions from a creature that's more powerful than me, So God creates Satan. Satan can deceive me. How can I possibly be held responsible for being deceived by Satan? It doesn't make any sense. It would be like hiring a magician for a kid's birthday party and then blaming the kids for being fooled.
Yeah. Unless your eternal burning forever would glorify God all the more.
Yeah, it just doesn't make sense to me that if there is a truly good being. Now I know myself, and I'm learning more about myself, and so like when Ray Comfort accuses me of secretly knowing that there's a God, and I called him out on it, and it was his favorite thing, ooh, look at how angry Matt's getting. He's being convicted by the Holy Spirit. And I'm like, no, I'm irritated because I'm in a conversation with a jackass who keeps telling me I know something, which I know is not true. And it's incredibly frustrating to have somebody sit there and tell you, no, you know there's a God. I genuinely don't, and I'm not convinced there is. But if there's a good God, I know that any good God that would judge me as having failed to accept a reasoned argument is a bumbling buffoon who doesn't understand reason and evidence. And so if there is a God who understands all of that, it couldn't possibly hold me responsible for being deceived by something more powerful than me. Or I'm confident that I've exercised intellectual honesty and rigor, and a God that would still punish me for that is not moral. Doesn't mean he's not there, but the fact that no God's doing that gets us closer and closer to the argument from divine hiddenness, which I think is the strongest reason to not only not believe in a God, but conclude that gods probably don't exist.
So I suppose I'd like to, maybe before getting into some of the arguments and stuff, though, there are obviously questions about that and questions about your recent debate with Ray that I'd want to ask.
Sure.
I was wondering, maybe first, how then did you go from that kind of that period after leaving Dell to where you are now, where you're like almost this figurehead of atheism in some sense, or you're someone who people would associate with maybe like the organized version or expect to see debating big names and things like that. How did you go from there to from kind of leaving Dell to where you are now?
Yeah, so around 9/11, there were a lot of things that started happening, changing. I was unemployed when 9/11 happened. It was in the middle of or maybe towards the end of my year and a half long kind of search to do right by God and do what God wanted me to do. That's when 9/11 happened. And I don't know the specifics of how it impacted me, but I reached a point where I was like, I'm not a Christian. I can't identify as a Christian. Let me go find out what type of God might be possible. Let me, spend some time studying philosophy and directing the search, because I don't have the time or energy or education to evaluate every single religion to find out which one of them could be right. So let's find out what type of God might exist. And I used to joke that I started by investigating Buddhism to see if I would have multiple reincarnated lives to explore this question, because it's too much for one life. Eventually, around, so it's 2020 right now. I've been hosting the show since 2005. I called in 2004. Somewhere around 2002, 2003, I was working a software QA job and having conversations about this stuff with people at work. And I started writing little essays for some really terrible online rags. There was a site that's now defunct called, you watch, I'm not going to, I'll keep telling the story. Maybe I'll remember the name of it. It's defunct, but it was basically a place where anybody could submit. It was before blogs, and anybody could submit a post, and the editors there were pretty loosey-goosey. And there were people there. There's a guy who posted there, and he would post sermons, and he posted anonymously as Skip to Maloo. And I took those sermons and would go look up the same Bible verses, and I would write a counter sermon to show that the verses that he picked could easily be viewed in a way to lead someone to a completely different message. And matter of fact, sometimes my take was a much plainer, clearer understanding of the text than the deep dive he would try and do to justify what he wanted. And I wrote a lot of those. And somebody at work said, hey, there's this atheist show on TV. Have you seen it? And I said, no. And why would I want to watch that? I don't want to watch a bunch of, I'm an atheist now. I don't want to watch a bunch of people I agree with. I want to talk to the people that I don't agree with. I want to interact with people who believe the things I used to believe. Because if I'm wrong, I'd love to know. And if they're wrong, I think, and they want to know, I'm happy to talk with that. And they said, no, it's a call-in show. And so it is all about interacting with believers. And I thought, well, that's interesting. And I ignored it. And one Sunday I went out to check the mail, and there was a flyer above the mailbox on the little bulletin board. And it was about the atheist experience. Because as it turns out, Jeff D., who is a former host, co-host, he lived in the same apartment complex that I did at that time, and it put the flyer up. And
Divine providence.
Yeah. And that's the de facto joke on that.
Right.
And so I went back, and like it was an hour before the show started. I watched that show. I called into that show. I went to the after dinner event with that show. A week or two later, I was screening calls and volunteering. And then a few months later, because that would have been December of 2004. And then March of 2005, I was there with Ashley, and Jeff D forgot that it was his week to co-host. And Ashley looked at me and said, hey, you want to co-host today? And I was like, yes. And I did the episode, and I drove home, and I told my roommate that I had done it. He said, how'd it go? And I was like, that's going to be my show in 6 months. And I just meant that this is what I'm going to do all the time. I immediately knew this is what I wanted to do. Yeah. And I've been doing that ever since. It happened to coincide with us starting to stream the show on YouTube, which meant that now we're not just a public access show in Austin. Now we're international and getting international calls. And that led to getting booked at conventions, and that led to getting debate offers. And yeah, it just kind of built up from there.
So then I guess off the back of that as well, you've debated some of the sort of big names, but also the big names in Christian apologetics, that is. Also debating people like Jordan Peterson as well. Interestingly, is it just kind of like you're sort of against what you see as maybe like wooey type things or kind of like culty type? Yeah. And
I'm a skeptic and a humanist first. Those are the two most important things. I'm a skeptic because I want to believe as many true things and as few false things as possible, and I want to have a sound epistemology. I want my internal model of reality to match reality as best I can. I'm a humanist because, as far as I can tell, we have to solve our own problems. We can't count on divine providence. No matter what we try and study about the efficacy of prayer, at the end of the day, if it appears, whether or not there's a God, that you and I have to share space and find a way to cooperate and do that, even if we disagree about a God. And I've said before, if God's not a humanist, I don't want anything to do with him, because humanism is all about human beings and their value and how we live a better life. And if God's not interested in that, I don't know what use I have for them. But so definitely a skeptic and humanist first, atheist secondary. If it turns out there's a God, I'm still a skeptic. I'm still a humanist. The thing with Jordan Peterson, I have no expertise in politics or money or any number of other things. Sure. But he got popular by basically, from my view and the view of some lawyers, misrepresenting the C-16 bill in Canada. And then his popularity was confusing to me because I would listen to him and I couldn't find anything that I found particularly impressive or insightful. It's like when somebody watches The Matrix, the first movie, for the first time, if they have no background in philosophy, they don't know anything about the problem of hard solipsism, that movie is, oh my God. And yet for people who have an interest in those sorts of things and a background in it, it's like, yeah, that's a really good example of what we're talking about. But then there's also like let's say there was somebody just talking about the Matrix and kind of getting it right and trying to give some kind of metaphorical advice for people. That's the category that I was putting Peterson in. And I knew that I'd seen him scoff at skepticism, and he did it live on stage while we were there. I've seen him misrepresent humanism, and which he did also on stage there. I wanted to have the conversation because I think there were things there to challenge, and he was always writing this line where he appealed to atheists and Christians because he was really fuzzy about the God thing. And when pressed on it, he's like, oh, I'd need a year to study to figure it out. And I'm like, let me put my Christian hat back on. That means you're not a Christian and you don't believe. Anybody, like if I ever went to anybody who thought they were a Christian and said, hey, what do you think about, Jesus' resurrection or the existence of Jesus? There's no way they'd say, you know what, I need a year and a half to study that before I could give you an answer. You're not a Christian if you think that. And so I think he was, I don't know. I had issues with him, but I wanted to have a good conversation. And I think it went well enough that he refuses to have another one with me.
That's interesting. I think so as someone who kind of, like I was, what, about 18 when Peterson was getting popular and was exposed to his message through like Joe Rogan's podcast and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. I think people maybe see as part of this sort of culture war, whether or not such a thing actually exists or is just kind of a media narrative, this thing going on. And maybe when people are thinking about religion and whether they want to be like an atheist or a Christian or something, they go, oh well, Peterson's kind of standing for Christian values, and here is atheism opposing someone like Peterson, and so clearly this Christianity thing is true to some extent because we've got the secular morality kind of opposing the Christian morality, and there's this big cultural battle going on, kind of like is it Paul writes about with the spiritual forces that are battling for reality, and we're kind of in it. And I, right. I wonder if you think, I don't know, maybe people look at that and I maybe myself even included, kind of go towards Christianity because they think, well, atheism isn't an option because there's this cultural battle and I've got to take a stance in what's going on, right. In that, or I don't know, maybe that's a really bad question.
No, it's so I'm working on the outline for a video because of a single comment that somebody made to me yesterday. They had a sibling who is a Christian, even though they were raised in a Methodist household without a Bible. I mean, no offense to my many, many Methodist friends, but when my mom and dad got married, my dad was Southern Baptist, my mom was Catholic at the time, and they got married in a Methodist church because that's the neutral ground. Methodists really don't give a crap about a number of aspects of this. And so she was raised kind of Methodist. And now her sister is a believer who also believes in reincarnation. And they never really got into how that worked out. And the truth of the matter is that there's a lot of different religions, but there's a lot of different Christianities too. One of my favorite books ever is Bart Ehrman has a book called Lost Christianities. And it's plural for a very good reason it's great because it goes through a number of different first and second century versions of Christianity and the battles for, was Jesus real? Was he human? Did all this take place here? Did it take place in a spiritual realm? All those fights, some of which are doctrinally important, some of them aren't. But I'm working on a video about that because the truth is you could go into any church and if you could read the mind of two people in the same pew, you would get a different understanding of God and what God wants and what, this is. We mold these stories to suit our lives. This is the value in them. This is why somebody like Jordan Peterson is finding metaphorical substance to guide people's lives. This is why these stories are endearing. It is why, I'm a big fan of Joseph Campbell and his views about myth. It's the reason why these stories resonate because we see ourselves in them. And the second you do that, the second you say, when I read the prodigal son story, I see a part of myself. That was actually a bit of a battle between me and Ray because I was asking where it mentioned prostitute because Ray was saying the prodigal son basically just ran off because he just wanted to go be with prostitutes. And my view was, well, that may be part of it, but this is the stereotypical story of here's someone sheltered living on a farm who wants to go see what the big city has to, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And Ray only wanted to focus on sex. And they love to pretend like I didn't know, oh, Matt didn't know a verse in the Bible mentioned prostitutes. I didn't know that one did, but it's because I had this model. And it's because what we all do. We see ourselves in the story. And when I saw myself in the prodigal son story, it was about, let me go out and see what the world has to offer because I've been sheltered. And the primary thing about the prodigal son is about returning to what we should truly value, according to the Bible. I'm not convinced. And being accepted when returning from mistakes to family. That, to me, is the moral lesson, not the Bible's warning you not to run off and go be with prostitutes. And that's why my view of it's different. But for Ray, it was him catching me not knowing something about the Bible or getting it wrong. Which, to be fair, I tried to catch him doing it too, because he referenced a passage in Mark, but I thought he said Matthew, and I already had the verses, but it doesn't matter. It's when we see ourselves in these stories, when we do the interpretation, what we've done is everybody's inventing their own Christianity to some extent, which I think is another damning argument against it, because if that keeps going to the point where there are billions of different versions of Christianity, how long can that persist before a God has a moral obligation to step in and offer correction? And I would say that we're thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of years overdue for that sort of correction.
Maybe a few more crusades or European wars or something over the correct doctrine.
Instead of burning witches, are we going to, burn Methodists next? It's like, And so, you've got the Protestant and Catholic fights going on all over the place, but go ahead.
And I have come across as well, I've found it really interesting. I don't know if you've seen a YouTube channel called Nick Fuentes.
Doesn't ring a bell.
There's like this movement of, off the back of like the Trump stuff. And I'm not massive on American politics, but there's, young, getting back to traditional values, Catholics who are really, really politically radical, like really, no nuance when it comes to topics like abortion or even like LGBT issues and stuff like that, like really, really extreme views. And it kind of, it scares me, to be honest, to see, because I think our generation in a lot of ways is naive because it's been so disconnected from a lot of, because religion's kind of, maybe again, different story in the US, but in the UK, I think a lot of people aren't exposed to religion and those kinds of ideas growing up. And then when they do get exposed to them in their 20s and they're trying to figure out what life's all about and stuff, they don't understand some of the harms and psychological weirdness that can be involved in that because they've never been around it or exposed to it. And the political stuff is what scares me.
Yeah, I'm going to have to do, I don't have to. I could ignore, Ray basically posted a video of the whole debate the other day, and instead of showing him at all, even when he's talking, he only shows the camera on me.
Okay.
And occasionally, I haven't watched the whole thing. I've watched like maybe 5 minutes of it, but it'll pop up text maybe showing where I was wrong or showing some challenge or get ready to, get mad or look how mad or angry. And it's funny because I know when I'm really angry. Like I got angry in a heated argument a few weeks ago and punched a door in the house. That's something I haven't done in years. I've never physically harmed another person in my entire life. The one fight I was ever in grade school ended up with me having the guy in a headlock and his brother breaking it up. I don't have any interest in fighting, but in frustration, I punched the door, and the person I was arguing with was like, stop punching doors. And I'm like, I'll punch any door in my house. It was my house, And it was just the frustration of the moment. And because of that, my hand has been healing and recovering. There may have been a strain, a fracture, whatever, I don't know. But I know what angry is. And I also know that Ray doesn't make me angry. Ray frustrates the crap out of me because we had a discussion about, does the gospel message make sense? Right. And I came with an opening statement that addressed the gospel message and talked about various ways that it could make sense or not make sense. And Ray showed up and said, I just want to preach to Matt because I love Matt. And I want to say that God is an axiom that we just accept. and that the gospel message makes sense to the people who believe it and live it. That's not an argument. That's not evidence. That's basically saying you just don't get it. And so I don't have to actually address it, but I may address it because Ray seems very obsessed with sex to me. Like his story of the prodigal son is all about the prostitute. His personal testimony is that God convicted him with a single verse about his lust. And the number of times that he mentions sex and stuff in that, I asked him at one point, what's wrong with prostitution? Right, and he was like, did I say anything was wrong with prostitution? But that's the implication. It's like, did you really agree to come in and have a discussion with me just so you could get video footage that you could use and use dishonestly instead of having the conversation we're supposed to have? I don't know. I can't say that was his only goal. I can't say that he's lying when he says he loves me and wants me to. It's just really frustrating. But not to keep talking about Ray.
No, it's fine. If to go on to that debate maybe a little bit more. What is your general thought of the kind of Ray Comfort method? You know, like have you ever told a lie? Have you? Do you think
it's so easy to rebut? Have you ever told the truth? What does that make you? That is an instant response. Right. So what Ray's whole shtick is, if you were to translate it into human speak, are you a human being that's perfect or not? Oh, you're not perfect? Hey, I know a God that cares about you even though you're not perfect, even though you are not deserving of being in his perfect presence. If you take these steps and start living your life this way, you will deserve to be in God's perfect presence. That's the entirety of his message.
And I suppose then, you know, do you think people convert based off of Ray's message because they feel guilty or because of truth? Well, I mean, that's an obvious kind of answer, but do you think it's actually kind of, do you think it's kind of harmful what he's doing in a way because of that? Maybe people, maybe it's kind of leading people emotionally into feeling a certain way, and then they.
It's harmful if it's not true. So if you can convince people of something, so people convert to religions, plural, on a regular basis. It's not just that Ray is doing things and some people are converting to his particular version. There are lots of people doing this, and not just for Ray's particular version of Christianity. People convert all the time. If they're converting for bad reasons, then I think it's something that's harmful. And if the process of conversion forces them to set their religious views aside in a protected space that isn't subject to rational review, that isn't subject to logical argument or sound evidence, I think that's a problem, because beliefs in our head don't live in a vacuum. And if I can convince you to believe one thing on bad evidence, now the door's open for me to potentially convince you of other things for bad evidence. It gets the quote from Voltaire: if you can get people to believe absurdities, you can get them to commit atrocities. And I think that is absolutely the thing. Now, does that mean that the overwhelming majority of people who buy into Ray's or somebody else's version of Christianity are going to destroy the world? No. Most of them are just generally good people who when faced with someone in their face saying, have you ever told a lie? You know, have you ever done this? You know, they're like, yes, I've done all these. Well, the Bible says that you're bad and deserving of hell. Oh yeah, I remember hearing about that, because they live in a world where they were indoctrinated and enculturated into these sorts of things, probably from childhood. It's, even if you're not in a family that's religious, you're surrounded by it all the time. It's on the television, it's on the radio, it's family members. There's a church every 20 feet in my town, seemingly. I mean, it's a slight exaggeration, but I have one road that's less than a quarter mile long where there are 8 churches. It's bizarre. And so you live in a world where you feel like you're outside of something, because Christianity and religiosity are the norm of at least 50% plus. And so when somebody comes up to you, it's very easy to convince someone if they don't have any understanding of evidence or what should convince them. You know, find somebody that Ray just convinced like just prayed the sinner's prayer right there and you know, down on the pier, and then let me have a conversation with them right after they prayed the sinner's prayer and ask them questions and see if they come out of it the same.
Do you think that a lot of maybe Ray's kind of style essentially is like carrots and sticks? It's sort of, you know, hell is so scary that even if or maybe not even like a Pascal's wager rational argument or anything, but just this thing is so scary, like
it's what's the alternative? And you know, when I created my Atheist Debates Patreon project, Pascal's wager was the first thing I addressed. So there's like a 30-minute video up there with lots of video editing and stock footage and stuff like that I put together specifically because I wanted to address Pascal's wager, because it comes up all the time and it comes up in ways that isn't always obvious. And so I think, that plays into what Ray does. I don't know Ray all that well. I have, until recently, I've generally liked Ray. And when my atheist friends would come to me and say, Ray's a liar, I would say, what do you mean? Everybody lies. You know, no, he's lying. He's lying about what he believes. And I said, how could you prove that? You know, I have no reason to think that he's not sincere about what he believes, because despite the fact that I pretend to read minds on stage, I don't actually get to read minds, you know?
Yeah. Is there a particular moment in that discussion with him that kind of stands out to you as, I don't know, maybe the most kind of frustrating or okay.
Yeah, it's the one they used at the beginning of the video they posted, where I said, I swear to the God you believe in, if you accuse me of knowing something one more time that's not true, we're done here. Because if you're just going to stand there, like, let's say I put my Christian hat on and I tell someone, hey, I just want you to know that God loves you and you're going to go to hell according to God's message, but there's a path to salvation for you. And that person says, well, I don't believe in God. And I say, yes, you do. Yes, you do. No. You know there's a God. This is what Cy Ten Bruggencate did as well. And he's a presuppositionalist. So you got Ray, who's supposed...
I've lost your audio, I think, Matt. I don't know if... Let me just see what's going on. Just having a look. I think people in the stream are saying they've lost your audio. Yeah, no problem. He's just sorting it out, guys. If you're watching, thank you everyone for watching. See a few Christians. Is Dry Apologist still here as well? No, Dry Apologist gone, but I see Craig Reed, Christoph Keating here as well. Brennan, Producer Dane, West Coast Islander. You were kind of sort of deconverting around a month or so ago and thinking about things. How have you got on with your journey? Oh, I think we've got Matt back now in... No, I can't. I heard a noise. I heard a crackle, but no. You could try leaving and rejoining, maybe, if you can hear me. That might... Yeah, okay, awesome. Yeah, this is a sign from God. Well, I hope everyone's enjoying watching as well. If you've got questions, just drop any questions into the chat, and if we've got time at the end, I'll try. Hopefully, we'll be able to get through them all, guys. Yeah, the rest of the interview will be conducted by text. Stop talking about atheism. Is that a joke? Ray is anon. Yeah, Ray Comfort is hacking the debate, the discussion, debate. See if Matt's able to join. Spent 2 years researching your faith. Yeah. Have you had a difficult time with it, West Coast Islander, or have you are you more stoic, like kind of Pine Creek and Matt as someone, or have you been a bit crazy like me with your kind of deconversion? I think so because V mentioned it, I might mention the crazy story where V has a scar on her stomach, right? And I thought the first time I saw that scar that it was because what she does is she hooks up with guys and cuts babies out of her stomach to sacrifice them to Satan. Because I was doubting Christianity, I thought that V was an instrument of the devil who had been brought into my life. Message from Matt. It's encoding the recording back in 2 minutes. No problem. So I'm going to keep you guys entertained for 2 minutes while Matt is resolving his issues. This Friday, for those of you who are interested, I'm interviewing Professor, I can't pronounce his first name, Langerlund, who teaches at a university in Sweden. And I'm going to be interviewing him about philosophical skepticism. So he's just brought out a book, Routledge Introduction to Philosophical Skepticism. So if you're interested in that conversation on Friday, be sure to check it out. Let me see. I want to find where. I also want to try and get Laura Robinson on. I think that would be a really good conversation, hopefully. And I want to review Henrik Langerlund is his name. And I want to review as well the conversation that she had with Mike Licona. For those of you who haven't watched it or watched Pine Creek's review of it, which was good. Yeah, so Henrik Langerlund, professor of philosophy at Stockholm University. So he's who I'll be interviewing on Friday before I go away for a week. So nothing then. And then I've also got Justin Brearley of Unbelievable Podcast lined up in future. And Dr. Seigart as well. So a few Christian ones for you as well. And yeah, so we can take a look at what was it called? We can take a look at Laura's debate with Mike Licona on the resurrection at some point. Was it on Modern Day Debate? The Matt Dillahunty versus Ray Comfort. There we go. And I will share with you guys portion of screen, share computer sound. Let me know if this is too loud.
Also, Matt, I just want to take a moment to thank you so much for the kindness. your question or comment to the top of the Q&A list. The only thing we ask, of course, is that you be your regular friendly selves for all of your questions or comments. Both of the links of our speakers.
I think Matt has rejoined us. Well, I can see that he's in. I don't know if his mic and camera are currently muted. Maybe he's still figuring those things out. So.
In the description, so that way if you'd like to hear more, you can hear Matt. We're going to a proper introduction. So I do want a quick mention first, which is a live weekly call-in.
Gospel, but I'm going to direct it at you, Matt. And the reason for that is because I love you and I care about where you spend eternity, and Penn Jillette was right.
So it's because he cares about where Matt spends eternity. So it's about a threat from the off.
And the reason for that is because I love you and I care about where you spend eternity, and Penn Jillette was right when he said, if you believe in hell and you've found everlasting life, how much do you have to hate someone not to share the gospel with them? So, Matt, you're the man. You're the dartboard and the arrow's coming your way.
I think Matt is back in the chat now. Oh, I still can't hear you. Have you got, I don't know, maybe a default mic or something? Or it's all right if we can't get it to work. Yeah, I can't hear you then if you were trying to talk. No. Well, I tell you what, Matt, we can, if you want, we can wrap this up and okay. Oh no, you're figuring it out? Or I'll keep going with some of
I believe you're in terrible danger, and I believe you don't believe that. And if I can convince you that you are in terrible danger, I'm doing you the ultimate favor. You know, I was a believer in evolution when I became a Christian, but the night I became a Christian, it wasn't.
So the important thing is that you don't believe in evolution. Evolution is the evil thing here.
I was a believer in evolution when I became a Christian, but the night I became a Christian, it wasn't somebody destroying evolution that convinced me that the gospel was right. It was one Bible verse. And that is where Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount, the most famous sermon ever preached, you've heard it said by them of old, you shall not commit adultery. And I remember thinking to myself, well, I've never committed adultery, and if heaven exists, I'm going to make it there because I've not broken that commandment. But then I read the words of Jesus, but I say to you, who...
just for those of you who are here, what Matt's saying is that he has a bug with his audio driver for his audio mixer, so he's just going to sort that out and then hopefully be back.
Whoever looks upon a woman to lust for her has committed adultery already with her in his heart. And it was like an arrow hit my chest. And Matt, I know you're very familiar with the gospel. You're very familiar with the words of Jesus. I'm sure you're very familiar with the story of the rich young ruler who came to Jesus, knelt down and said, good master, what should I do to inherit eternal life? It's, I think, Mark 10, verse 17. And Jesus said something really weird to him. He said, why do you call me good? There's none good but God. And the reason he did that, I believe, is that most of us proclaim our own goodness. We think we're good people. But then Jesus gave him 5 of the 10 commandments to bring the knowledge of sin and to show him he was a sinner. And that's why every time I do a debate or witness or share with someone, I go through the commandments to bring the knowledge of sin, because I know, Matt, that you have a conscience that bears witness with the commandments. God has taken...
Yeah, I can hear you. Got you back.
Yeah, the audio from Ray is like 10 times louder than you.
Oh, right. I've not figured that out. Do I even have an option for mixing the sound like that? Maybe I'd need to use something else for my audio and link that up to...
And now it says Zoom meeting's not responding. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. I just can't see you. Which is okay, I guess.
No, let me restart this again.
Okay, sure. obviously God doesn't want us to. Oh, I can see video now, but it's
I
kind of
tried to
behind.
launch 2 different versions. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you and see you now.
All right.
So someone in the chat was saying Ray Comfort has hacked the Zoom meeting.
Yeah, well, people say all kinds of stupid things. Ray Comfort couldn't hack a log. Yeah, so, it's not letting me record again, but.
I'll change your permissions so you can.